Hello, students. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice long weekend. I'm going to walk you through the slides for this week. It's a shorter week. It'll be Tuesday through Friday. There's two things we're going to be focusing on. So rather than usually we've had about three. So complete it at your own pace, whatever works best for you. But I broke it up into 2 days. So day one, checking and planning your tension. So let's take a look at what this means. First, you're going to respond to this week's personal check-in prompt. So you're going to go into the community folder and you'll complete the check-in prompt in the community folder. When you're done with that, you're going to review the slides that I'm about to show you, and then you're going to do a post in the protagonist, antagonist, and tension discussion board. So you're going to be planning out your story this week. You're not actually going to write it, you're just planning it out. You can choose to continue on with the work you've done over the last couple of weeks on setting and character, or you can write about brand new characters and places within the plot you establish. Next week, you'll have the opportunity to expand on your planning and write out your entire story. So, a couple things. Tension. We've gone over this before. So just as a review, the protagonist is the main character. This is the central figure in the story. It doesn't always have to be good. And then the antagonist is the source of the tension, an opposing force that prevents the protagonist from achieving their goals. Not necessarily a person or individual. It could be the character themselves. So maybe there's an internal source of tension that the character is trying to work through. It could be another individual, or it could be something else completely. Tension, the resistance that the protagonist finds in achieving their goals. So in good stories, this is more complex than the term conflict would lead us to believe, because it's not just external. So what are the internal forces and the external forces that are causing tension for the character and inhibiting them or stopping them from reaching their goals that they have to things they have to overcome? As you know, external tension is the obvious kind of tension. It could be a battle, an argument, character versus character, character versus nature, character versus society. Okay? So these are all sources. You can have multiple sources of tension in your book, in your story. And then internal tension. This is the trickier, deeper kind. You do want to have internal tension within your character. What is it that they're struggling with? What kind of needs, wants, fears, weaknesses, motivations, flaws? Remember that indirect characterization stuff that you've been working on? This gives depth to the story, and it makes us care about the character and want to root for them as they face this tension and these obstacles. Remember, we did Thank You, Ma'am, and we looked at the protagonist, we looked at the antagonist, and then we looked at the sources of tension. So same idea with your story. You want, if someone was to analyze your story, would they be also able to find the protagonist, the antagonist, and the sources of tension? Remember in Thank You, Ma'am, Roger, he was the protagonist. He changes as a result of the kindness Mrs. Jones shows him. The antagonist is Mrs. Jones. She keeps Roger from stealing from her and from running away. And then the tension, both Mrs. Jones physically restrains him, but Roger struggles internally with whether or not he can trust her kindness and compassion. So, your first submission, okay, as an initial planning step for your story is to post who is the protagonist in your story. So briefly describe one of their character traits. What is your character's central goal? Okay, so in addition to protagonist, what is also their goal? Who or what is the antagonist in the story? And then last, what is the main source of tension? And with each of those, I gave you a little more. I want you to describe a little bit. So for the first one, who's the protagonist? Really to describe something about them. The second one, what is the goal of that protagonist? Briefly explain why they are trying to achieve it. Who or what is the antagonist in your story? So briefly describe one character trait about your antagonist. And then what is the main source of tension in the story? So don't only just say character versus character, or character versus nature, or character versus self. Describe one way this tension reveals itself in your story. So just give a little description to each of these so we get a better idea of who the protagonist is, who the antagonist is, what goal the protagonist is trying to achieve, and what tensions the protagonist is facing in achieving those goals. Okay. Day 2. This is where you're going to get to plot your story. So read through these slides. Then what you're going to do is you're going to complete a graphic organizer that sketches out your plot, right? You don't have to do the organizer. You can do it on a piece of paper and sketch it out that way. But I want you to follow the format, the organizer format that I have set up for you. You need to identify the different elements of your plot. We'll go over what those elements are here shortly. And you're going to put that in your plotting your story submission. Let's look at this. Story elements, plot diagram, presentation, and assignments. The plot is an organized sequence of events that make up your story. So now that you have a character, some setting, and you've identified, the protagonist, antagonist, goal, intention, what are the events that are going to occur in the course of your book to exhibit those things? These are the ones that I want you to do this week. You're going to come up with an exposition, an inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So your final result will look something like this, and I'll show you the graphic organizer here in a little bit. So exposition usually occurs at the start of the story. It's where the readers learn about the character's setting and are introduced to background information, the context. So you're really just introducing characters, you're introducing setting at this point in the exposition. So, for example, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, right? So you're introducing, getting your readers hooked, in addition to providing them with some information about the background. After exposition is the inciting incident. This is an episode, plot point, or event that, yes, this actually hooks the reader. This particular moment is when an event thrusts the protagonist into the action of the story. So first, think about it, as just exposition, sort of explaining what's going on, then really thrust this into the story. When Peter Parker is bitten by a radioactive spider, this awakens a desire and reason in Peter to become something more than just a clumsy high school student who people ignore. So in the first part of the story, you learn that he's a high school student, people ignore him. Then something happens, that causes him to begin, or causes the protagonist to begin to engage in this rising action. What is the rising action? This is the part of the story where the majority of the action takes place. The reader begins to see the conflict develop and interest and suspense are built. So let's look at Little Red Riding Hood. What was the rising action? The girl meets the wolf eats the grandmother, the wolf disguises himself as grandmother, Red visits grandmother, who's now really the wolf, Red questions grandmother, who now appears oddly different. So all these different events lead up to the climax. Climax is the turning point in the story. It's usually the moment the rising action has built up to and is the most intense emotional point. The main character will often change in some way at this point in the plot, and the focus switches from not just the problem, but to the solution. So let's look at Hunger Games. Peeta and Katniss agree to eat the poisonous berries instead of attempt to kill each other. And the outcome is that they are both declared winners. Okay? So all that rising action, all that work that Katniss and Peeta went through as they went into the Hunger Games, trained and had to get their what was it? People to support them. I can't think of it right now. But anyways, they got the people to support them. They went through all that, and then they go through these challenges, and then they get to this climactic scene where they have to make a decision between killing each other, or they decide to try to, break the whole cycle of the Hunger Games, and both die. Falling action. During the falling action, loose ends of the plot are tied up. Usually the conflict and the climax are going through the process of being resolved. So let's look at Star Wars. Luke Skywalker destroys the Death Star, and then he returns to the Rebel base, a hero, and receiving congratulations from his friends and the Rebel fighters. This is the resolution. At the resolution, the story comes to a final conclusion. This usually means the conflict is completely resolved, or is determined unsolvable, if that's the direction you're going. The resolution is sometimes also called I can't pronounce that correctly. So you're going to have to tell me how to pronounce that. At the end of Return of the Jedi, the Emperor has been killed by Darth Vader, who's Luke's father. And while Darth Vader has also died, he and Luke were able to reconcile before his death. Luke returns to the planet where his friends are waiting, and they celebrate the end of the Empire. So just big resolution at the end. Everything's resolved. And then, the end. Okay, this is a quick check. The loose ends of the plot are tied up and the conflict is going through the process of being resolved. Falling action. The turning point of the story that is the most intense or emotional point. Climax. Where the readers learn about the character's setting in the main conflict. Exposition. Where the conflict is completely resolved or is determined unsolvable. Resolution. Where the majority of the action takes place. Rising action. An event that thrusts the protagonist into the main action of the story, inciting incident. Okay? Here are some examples. The Three Little Pigs. You can get all of the events you see here for the rising action. So you see the majority of the action takes place in this part of the story. You can also look at Harry Potter and see how that looks to you. This is the graphic organizer. So either make an image of this on a piece of paper or print out the one that I have provided for you and just fill it in. So you have the exposition, then the inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, and then resolution. So you'll chart that out or sketch it, and then you'll submit a copy of it or a picture of your plot diagram to the Plotting Your Story submission. And that is your week's assignments. So I look forward to seeing what you guys put together. Have a great week and ask me any questions as we go. Bye.